Hands-on buttons, creating effective calls to action. Hello, let's talk about call to action buttons and see how you can create fantastic looking ones by following 6 rules. First, what's a call to action? Well, websites are full of buttons, but call to action buttons are the most important. These ask the user to perform a certain action, hence their name. Every website should have a particular goal in mind, whether it's to sell a product, to download a file, to start a membership, or so on. To make that happen, we rely on CTAs, calls to action. Let's see what makes a great CTA button. 1. Use striking colors. The user is bombarded every second of browsing with flashing colors, animation, movies, larger-than-life photos, and with so much competition, an effective call to action button must stand out. We can't rely on its size since there's only so much wiggle room, so we focus on choosing a striking color. You should rely on this area of the color picker, so vibrant and very saturated colors. Let's create our first button. I'll use the rounded rectangle tool with the radius set at 5 pixels. Regarding the size, we'll go with 200 by 60 pixels. For the color, I'll go with a powerful red. I won't give you a specific code, instead we'll play around and see what's what. Now for the text, I'll write checkout in Proxima Nova semi-bold. For the size, I'll go with 15 pixels. Select them both and center them. This is a very modern call to action button. You might say it's too simple, but this is the current state of web design, and I appreciate the simplicity. By using these powerful colors, we can integrate this button in various sections and still get the much wanted attention from my users. It's all about setting yourself apart from all the other elements. 2. Rounded corners are in. Let's duplicate this button. We'll go with a corner radius of 25 pixels. I'll also resize it 180 by 60. I'll change the text as well to Get Started. For the font family, I'll go with Railway semi-bold. For the color, I'll use a nice shade of green. Again, this is a popular button that doesn't rely on gradients, drop shadows, patterns, or any other additional decoration. This style re-emerged in recent years due to flat website designs popping up everywhere. That's not to say square corners aren't okay, but in general, I recommend you stick with rounded corners. There are 2 main directions here. Either you use something between 4 and 10 pixels for the corner radius, so just a bit rounded, or you go with something significant like 25 pixels. Going in the middle of the road with 15 or so will not produce the most aesthetically pleasing results. 3. Use gorgeous fonts. You'll soon enough have a mental database of 5 to 10 fonts that are your personal favorites. Remember to use Google Fonts to browse quickly and see what's in at the moment. These are sorted by popularity. Let's create another button, this time with a few layer styles. Start with a rounded rectangle with a 10-pixel corner radius. Let's click and input these numbers manually, 200 by 60. Let's add the text before we start with any effects. I'll go with Start Your Trial in Montserrat Regular, size 15 pixels. Pure white, it goes without saying you should aim for maximum contrast. Right, now let's open the Layer Styles window and start with a gradient. We'll leave our angle at 90 degrees because that's the standard approach. Click on this area and let's customize it. I'll start with a basic gradient from one color to another. If you click on any of these pre-installed ones, you'll get some funky options. That's why I'm constantly resorting to the first few options. Okay, the left side is for the bottom of the button. Here we'll go with a darker shade of blue. Something like that, but it's not written in stone, we can always go back and adjust it. Now for the right part, which controls the top of the button. Notice something interesting here. If you try to sample a color from this button, it won't work. Here you'd expect that if I clicked, we'd get blue, right? That's not what happens. Instead, I'm getting green. That's because our gradient hasn't been applied yet, so as far as Photoshop is concerned, the button is still green. We're seeing it as blue, but this is just a preview the program's offering. If you really want to sample from that color, you must first commit to this gradient. Now, if you repeat the process, you'll see it'll work just fine. Okay, fast forward and I'm happy with this gradient. Now let's add a drop shadow, but it won't be what you expect. I'll change the blend mode to normal with an opacity of 100%. For the color, I'll sample this from the bottom region and go down a little more. For the settings, I'll keep the angle at 90 degrees, but I'll use a distance of 4 pixels in combination with a size of 0 pixels. That's going to make our shadow solid. Now you can see it's looking like the button is 3D, like it has depth. This is controlled from the distance slider, and you can decide how much you want. Finally, I'll add an inner shadow, which again won't be standard. I'll use pure white with the opacity set at 100% on normal. Next, I'll go with 1 pixel for its size, and that's it. The rest will be set at 0. Notice how we have a highlight of sorts at the bottom. And that's our button. Though it requires several techniques, I wouldn't say it's as modern as the first two. It's a question of personal taste, but also a matter of circumstance. Here we have these CTAs isolated, we have no supporting content, so it's difficult to give a definitive score. I can tell you that you should focus on semi-flat gradients, so the difference between your colours should be minimal. Let's continue with our 6 rules. Rule number 4. Don't clash with other buttons. You might need several buttons in your design. What's the approach there? Should we use the same design multiple times? No, instead we do the following. Let's start with a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 5 pixels, size 275 by 60. For the colour, I'll go with something fairly desaturated but still striking. This will do the job nicely. I'll write "Take this course" as my text. Font-wise, let's use Open Sans Light, 15 pixels for its size, centre it inside the button. Pausing here, let me give you a quick tip. If you're unsure about the font, do this. Select T for the Type tool and change your text alignment from left to centre. Now use the alignment tools to put it back in the middle of the button. Now if we quickly adjust the font family, you'll see our button will remain centred even if we adjust its size. This will allow you to make swift decisions while having the text in the correct position. So our first button is done, but say you need another one. Here's what we'll do. We'll duplicate it and take down the fill. Now we'll add a stroke on the inside. 2 pixels for the size, for the colour we'll use the exact same shade. Change the font as well, and there you go, a simple solution to a fairly common problem. Between these two, Take this course is more important, so I suggest you think about the priority of the user's actions. What's the best case scenario? Here, it would be to buy the course, but if he isn't convinced, he can watch a preview first, then come back and purchase it. So always consider the hierarchy by asking yourself, which is the most important action? Rule 5. Add more context when needed. Start with a rounded rectangle as per usual. 275 by 70 pixels, 10 pixel corner radius. For the colour, we'll go with a purple tone, so still something striking. For the text, we'll use "Get started" and "No credit card required." The top line will be written in Proxima Nova Bold 23 pixels. Use the all caps transformation and increase the tracking, aka the letter spacing, to 10. Centre it horizontally. For the bottom row, go with Proxima Nova Regular 14 pixels. No tracking, no caps, just change its colour to a nice yellow. Centre this one again. As you can see, they all occupy the same width, which is the ideal situation. If you can't do that, make sure your second line is a lot wider. You don't want a little bit outside these two imaginary vertical lines, you want a lot. Besides that point, one piece of advice that can help you is this. Adjust the vertical space between the two lines until you're happy. Then to centre them inside the button, make a group first. Now select the group and the button and use the alignment tools up top. When you're done, right-click and ungroup. This is how you make sure these two lines are perfectly centred. It's also a great idea to mix and match fonts, not only weights. Here we used Proxima Nova in both cases, but you could go with a handwritten font or a serif font. The sky is the limit. The idea is to give the user help regarding what's going to happen next. OK, I'll get started, but what will happen after I press this button? Well, that's where the second line comes into play. No credit card required, thus no payment is needed. This can dramatically increase conversions, meaning this will convince a lot more users to push this button. Whenever more information is required, try this two-line approach. You can also mention things like file size if it's a download, what version you're downloading, how long the trial is, etc. My last piece of advice, 6, add icons in the mix whenever you feel they add value. First, the button, 200 by 60, super rounded, 28 pixels. I'll use the same shade of green as in my second button to save time. The text, download file. I'll go with Oswald Bold, 16 pixels, make it all caps. I already have an icon prepared in another tab. This is taken from flaticon.com, a great source for these types of icons. Let me drag it in. I usually like to leave 10 pixels between my icons and my text. Looking good so far. Here we'll repeat the process from the previous button. We'll group the icon and the text. We'll select the button and align them. Finally, I'll ungroup. This is how you make sure your content isn't offset. So the idea is to help the user with a visual cue. The downwards arrow hints this is a download button. This is the place where icons come in handy. Don't use them for decorative purposes. Instead, try to add them only if they provide additional meaning. One final piece of advice is never to make your text too big for your button. For example, in the first couple of options, I could have easily cranked up the font size a lot. That looks far less elegant. Smaller is always better. Remember, your users aren't half-blind. With that, we've concluded this lecture. It's now your turn to create all these options. Remember that if you just watch, you won't get the best learning experience. Post the results in the comments section if you have something interesting to show off. Have fun!